Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords, and today I've got the Sword and Caravan and the Invisible College here in the view screen because I've got some really positive news about both of them. Sword and Caravan has just become an Electrum Bestseller in pretty quick time on drive-through. Everybody has been talking about it. The artwork, the writing. I haven't had any really negative comments about it in any respect. It's been a super hit. So thank you to everyone who bought those. And if you haven't picked up Sword and Caravan yet, you should totally check it out. If you want to know more about it, check out in the videos in this channel. I just recently did a detailed overview of the different sections that it has, where you get to see quite a lot of the art and the incredible hex maps and everything else that's in it. And the Invisible College is doing very well as well, and recently had Alexander Macris, creator of Adventure Conqueror King, talked about it, called it a masterpiece on his social media, which is very nice of him, very kind on his part. So, these are both doing very well in OSR circles. And today what I'm going to talk about is the OSR and the fake OSR. And to start with, I want to tell you a story that probably quite a few of you have heard, but maybe some of the younger viewers aren't familiar with. So in 1972, there was a presidential election in the United States, Nixon versus McGovern. Nixon was the Republican, McGovern was the Democrat. And the election was an absolute landslide. It was a level of victory for Richard Nixon that was just unbelievable. It's something that could never happen today, right? Nowadays it's all up to a few swing states. Everything is super divided, and there's very entrenched voting patterns in most of the states. But back then it was like a complete sweep for Nixon. McGovern won his home state, and I think that was it. And there's a famous story relating to that, which is that like the day after, a couple of days after the election, there was some person, some Democrat from New York, I think it was, who very famously said, "I can't believe that the election went the way it did, because literally everyone I know voted for McGovern." And so it's a perfect example of living in a bubble, right? That guy, of course, everyone he knew voted for McGovern. He lived in this rarefied little atmosphere of people who think that they understand how the world works, and were intentionally blocked off from anyone that could tell them otherwise. It's something that still happens today in many areas, right? I'm sure that there are a lot of people today that still think using the word Latinx is a really great idea that will win the hearts and minds of Latino people, for example. But anyways, this is kind of endemic of something that has been happening over the last few days on social media, because we've had a number of people who claim to be OSR people. I'll explain more about that later, that have been doing posts talking about about me and certain other people in the OSR, saying that they don't understand why anyone gives us attention, because nobody they know is influenced by the RPG Pundit, or Venture Satanis or James Raggi or Alexander Macris, who I just named. These people are, they're non-entities, And like one of them literally posted, "I don't get why the RPG Pundit gets invited to all these YouTube shows to talk about the OSR," which I do quite a bit, and when he's got no influence at all. He's never influenced any OSR design, and then there was somebody, some Monkey Games or something like that was saying, the RPG Pundit hasn't had any consistent level of production in the OSR, So I guess they've missed the fact, and I'll take this moment to advertise it. We're on issue 107 of RPG Pundit Presents The Northman Sigils, a complete system of authentically designed Germanic rune magic that you can put into your put into your D&D or OSR game. Obviously, you can use it in Lion and Dragon. So be sure to check that out. But if that doesn't interest you, it's only like $2.99 and it's PDF, RPG Pundit Presents. I have 106 other PDFs that are RPG Pundit Presents that have all kinds of fantastic stuff that you can use in your OSR and D&D games. And several of those are bestsellers, as are the compilations of those volumes. Also bestsellers. Sword and Caravan and Invisible College, bestsellers. Lion and Dragon, Dark Albion, Arrows of Indra, all of those, Star Adventurer, bestsellers. I've produced somewhere around 120 RPGs. So this idea, he doesn't produce anything. It's like these are people in a bubble, right, that are making these proclamations. And one of the interesting and a telling moment in that was that one of these people, I think the monkey person, said, and I'm not, their company is Monkey Something Games. I don't remember what it is, but they were saying something like that after Google Plus, the people like the pundit and James Raggy just disappeared. They're of no influence now. Which is very interesting and might require a bit of a history for some of you. Now, obviously, some of you in the audience might remember Google Plus, but a lot of you might not, because it has been quite a few years now. So Google Plus was a social media site that was created by Google to be a competitor to Facebook, and it never really took off. It never really succeeded as a competitor to Facebook, but it lasted for quite a few years, and it became appealing to certain niche groups. And one of the biggest niche groups that was using Google Plus a lot for their social media was RPG creators and RPG fans too, right? There was a big tabletop RPG community, so to say, in the Google Plus network. And a lot of very interesting debates and conversations happened there in ways similar to how it was in Twitter later on. And the OSR in particular had a very, very big presence. The early OSR had a very big presence in Google+. And of course, there were some of these people that came into Google+ that were originally part of the story games movement. And almost all of the people that I'm talking about here were originally involved in story gaming. There might be a few younger ones that are not, but that would have been if they'd been around back then, which is the movement derived from the Forge and GNS theory. Of creating these games of collaborative story creation that are not really RPGs, but they tried at one point in the early 2000s to kind of take over the RPG scene by claiming that regular RPGs were incoherent and broken, and that people didn't really want to play those. They just didn't know any better, and that their theory was the perfect theory of game design and would take over the world. And of course it didn't. It was a miserable flop. And of course it was destined to be that, because their first of all, their theories were all wrong. And second, they were trying to produce, this stuff that wasn't actually good design. It wasn't really good art. It was just kind of pretension, right? It's sort of like these supposedly avant-garde art movements or something that you hang a toilet cover on the wall and call that art. So they didn't do very well. And by the time that Google Plus came along, the Forge had been closed and story games was going nowhere. And suddenly the OSR was taking off as a design field. It was the beginning of the second wave of the OSR when the OSR stopped being just about making clones of old rule sets and started being about making new rules, new system, new variations of Dungeons and Dragons to fit a specific design goal. And that was a genius move that allowed for this incredible explosion of innovation in design, but that was worked within a framework that guaranteed that the product was going to have appeal, compatibility, and would lead to some very interesting experimentation that was nevertheless working within the foundations of RPG design. And so it became much more successful than the story gaming movement. And a lot of these old story gamers decided that they would suddenly discover that they were OSR people all along, including Ron Edwards, who was one of the founders of the story gaming movement. And they came in there and were basically kind of entryists into the OSR, and immediately started demanding blacklists and bans. The Google Plus was still the main location of OSR discussion at the time that 5th edition came out. It was where what they termed consultant gate happened, where a bunch of these story gamers who had by then begun also to adopt the wokest ideas, the SJWs, to bring political aspects into the hobby, demanded that myself and Zach Smith be fired by Wizards or banned for, blacklisted from gaming and stuff like that. Interesting times, And then Google Plus announced it was shutting down. And really, it was amazing that they'd lasted as long as it did, because like I said, it had clearly been a failure for years for Google in terms of being a competitor to Facebook. That never worked. But they had kind of lingered on for a good long time, and it had been very productive in terms of discussion for the OSR, but that was done, right? And they closed down. So after that, what has happened is that this kind of fake OSR, the people that were the entryists into OSR, and these kind of story gamer people that were using OSR trappings because they wanted desperately to make money off of RPGs, and they thought that was their way in. They went off to some corners of the internet, who knows where. I mean, well, a lot of them went to Twitter, right? But in Twitter, what happened is that almost immediately at that time, you started having the wokists blacklisting or blocklisting, better to put it more accurately, everybody that disagreed with them. So they intentionally shut out, they would do these things where it wasn't just, somebody, like they would block me from their Twitter, obviously, but they would also block anyone who followed me. And so all of a sudden, all those people disappeared from their Twitter. They don't see those people, they don't see anything that's going on. And they went off and made little communities in other places. I think, I don't know, Discord or Mammoth or wherever the hell they go. I don't really know. I don't worry too much about those people because they're all irrelevant, right? But so they went off into their little corners of the internet and were never heard from again, right? Meanwhile, the OSR, the real OSR, has a presence on Twitter. It has a presence on YouTube. And it also has its own kind of more lesser known communities of places where there's like very significant activity and discussion as well, in certain Facebook groups, and also especially on Mewe, which is another one of these kind of not so successful social media networks Mewe was trying to be another. It came up, in fact, right after Google Plus was shutting down, and wanted to be like another alternative to Facebook and Twitter, and in fact to Google Plus, with the added difference that Mewe has groups, the option for groups, sort of like Facebook groups. And so there are some very, very good, and if you're not on Mewe and you are a real OSR fan, you really should get on and check out these groups. You have the Inglorious OSR, you have the main OSR group on Mewe, you have Tenkar's Tavern is there, and it's the less censored version because there's also a Tenkar's Tavern on Facebook, but they tend to be super cautious about what gets posted there. Whereas on Mewe, it's much more relaxed, let's say, and several other groups that you can join. There's a very good DCC group there. And a lot of very good conversation happens there. But guess who isn't there? None of these people. They're not there, as they immediately said, "Oh no, the Mewe's been taken over by the evil white supremacists," or something like that, and they went off somewhere else. So I think that a few of these people obviously are right now the ones that are doing these arguments on Twitter about the influence of OSR designers. I think some of them are obviously knowledgeable and acting in bad faith, right? They're basically just engaging in propaganda to try to claim something that isn't true. But I think quite a few of them are probably suffering from the same effect that that New York liberal had back in '72, right? That they're like, oh, I've never seen anything the RPG pundit has said or written or done a video about, and therefore he must have no influence in the OSR. The OSR I know is, about these weirdo games that come out on itch.io, and they even have like a different, the center of their design world is different, so to say, right? They make these ridiculous little products on itch.io PDF only, and the other people on the OSR produce their stuff on drive-through-RPG, So they're completely isolated, and they don't, some of them I'm sure sincerely do not know. And then they see occasionally some YouTube channel, and there I am as the guest star on that YouTube channel talking about the OSR, and they can't understand anything about it. So it's really, really very funny, But they're going, oh well, has the RPG pundit, has he ever produced anything of note? He's does anybody buy his products even or play them? Well, I have constantly people posting about having bought my products and playing my products and being super happy with my products and using my products in very interesting ways. I've had people making source books for my games. There are 2 different source books for Star Adventurer, which I didn't write. One of them having mecha rules for Star Adventurer, and the other one being an adaptation for Star Adventurer to do a kind of Mass Effect type campaign. I think it was Mass Effect. I don't know. I'm not big on the video games. You can imagine. Somebody did a source book for the Invisible College, which added more realistic gun rules and body armor rules for modern play, because one of the criticisms the Invisible College has gotten in a couple of circles, people thought, well, there should be better gun rules, because I'm really not much of a gun guy, to be honest, and so I made some very simple rules for modern weapons and modern armor. And so somebody went out and did a source book for the Invisible College that just expanded on that note, right? And again, I've produced 120 RPG products, and almost all of them have been very successful. I make a full-time living off of RPGs, and I don't mean to be bragging, but since there are claims about me and stuff like that. I heard some people, somebody at one point in the Fake OSR. Said, oh, the RPG pundit is just a trust fund baby or something like that. That's not true at all. I do not have a trust fund. I do come from a relatively well-to-do family, but I have not taken a single dollar from my family from since I was 18. Not one. So everything I've made has been my own doing, and I'm doing a full-time living off of RPG design, and it's been very successful. I own my own house, and in fact, if I, again, it's a bit distasteful to have to say this sort of thing, but it's again to prove the lie, so to say, right? Like if I stopped working today and somehow got no further income from my RPG products, which obviously isn't going to happen, because another thing is that my RPG products sell consistently well. I'm still the sales from, for example, Dom Publishing hasn't published anything of mine in years, right? But from Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion and Cults of Chaos, which were the products I made for them, I'm still getting a pretty huge royalty check every single month. Those are still very, very successful games, and a lot of them are quite old. I'm still making money off of Arrows of Indra, which is even older. But let's say that all that went away, and I had to live on savings. Right now I could, without having to move a muscle, I would be perfectly fine for like 2 years. And so that means I'm not rich, right? But I think that's more than a lot of people can say, to be honest. But it isn't just about money. There's also this question of influence, right? I am not the most influential person in the OSR. I'll readily admit that. And I can name a couple of people that I would consider to be more influential than me in the OSR, in terms of people who've made numerous projects. There are some people also that had an influence because of specific things that they did, right? And forgetting all of the like old guard, the guys that were back in the days with Gary Gygax. I'm talking about, newer OSR people. So there were people like, for example, Alexander Macris did Adventure Conquer King. And that was the thing he did for OSR, but it was quite influential at the time, right? So he's still thought of as an influential person in the OSR. I don't know if he's as influential as I am in the OSR specifically, but he's a huge influence in other ways too. And Greg Gillespie did Barrow Maze, right? And it's still, in my opinion, we recently had him on Inappropriate Characters. And if you missed that interview, you should go to the Inappropriate Characters and check out the interview with Greg Gillespie. It was excellent. And in my opinion, Barrow Maze is probably the best dungeon ever made in the OSR. It's fantastic. But again, single product. But there are people who have done multiple products that I would still say are more influential than I am. You've got, for example, James Raggi, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, huge production. Also somebody who makes a full-time living off of RPGs and has had enormous influence on the OSR. For starters, he was really like the pioneer of the second wave of the OSR, right? The wave of making games that aren't just clones, but that are specifically novel design concepts. And, Kevin Crawford with Stars Without Number and the various other books in his series, another excellent example of second wave OSR that had a huge influence on gaming. Now, those are not these people. They're not the ex-story gamer pseudo OSR. And we know that they're not real OSR because every couple of years they flip-flop back and forth between saying the OSR must be destroyed because it's unsavable, and then suddenly switching around and saying, no, we're the real OSR, and sometimes renaming it. Remember Sword Dream? their dream of reaming swords that was like going to be the reborn and pure and woke OSR that lasted about 15 seconds and never produced a damn thing. Do they sometimes have an occasional Kickstarter that makes money? Yeah, sure, that's right, but that's different than having consistently selling products, and it's also different than having products that people actually play and engage with on a serious basis, right? Because a lot of that is about some kind of virtue signaling element or some kind of novelty element. And so people will pay for that. And of course, a lot of those Kickstarters will never actually show up. Swordsfall, for example, they'll never actually come into existence, but people will pay for them and virtue signal about them and tweet about them and therefore pretend that they're influential. As far as my influence on the OSR, well, I think I've had a fairly large influence, especially in what you could call the third wave of the OSR, which is to have games that are not just about an innovative system variation meant to have a certain effect, but also tying that to the concept of setting, So the perfect example being, again, stuff like Arrows of Indra, Dark Albion, Sword and Caravan, etc., where you have this combination of detailed and interesting setting, of a system that is meant to follow the emulation of that setting, and it's all done within the context of the framework of old school D&D. And obviously, I'm not pretending to be the king of the OSR. That's one of the things that pisses them off so much, is they're saying, "Oh, we got to get rid of this toxic element in the OSR, right?" Because they want to be the ones that decide how to control the OSR, and yet there is no king or pope of the OSR, and that's why they can't succeed at this. So it's quite funny to me that they've my appearances on YouTube channels has pissed them off enough to start making these kind of ridiculous declarations. But the fact is, the real OSR is thriving. It's doing really, really well. And there's a lot of people doing well at it. And a few of us, like me and Raggi, who are making a full-time living off it, and living probably a lot more comfortably than these people from the pretend OSR who are working at Starbucks while they share a 2-bedroom apartment with 4 other people, or something like that. And it's just it's kind of sad, but it's also kind of hilarious that a lot of the what allows them to maintain that paradigm, to maintain that bubble that they're in, is the fact that they themselves have isolated themselves, and then that means they think that they're the only people that are doing anything, right? And it's also a little bit hopeful in a way, because it means that there's probably people that are in that little bubble that think that that's the only way it works. And we know that's true because, for example, Taylor Lane was in that little bubble, and had been told by the people in that bubble, who are desperately afraid of anyone veering outside of the bubble and seeing another reality. They were told, you can't go over to these people. These people, you don't want to have anything to do with them. They're evil and ists of all kinds, and they'll attack you for no reason, and blah blah blah, right? That allows them to keep up what their whole setup basically is, which is a kind of pyramid scheme of having certain people that claim influence, probably make some products, but again, what the viability of those products is questionable. They claim influence, and then they end up demanding that other people promote their stuff and sell their stuff, talking about shilling, right? Like, I shill my own products for sure, but the way they do it is basically by a kind of indentured servitude of other people who will eventually, in this system of clientelism that they've devised, if they say all the right things and show off all the right politics and fit all the right demographic boxes, may eventually be allowed to promote some of their products too, right? And if there's people that are in that system, I think that's the way it always works. If they were to see the other OSR, this OSR that is like hugely supportive, that is an OSR that is full of people that are confident in their own designs. So that, I promote other OSR creators all the time because I'm completely confident in my products. I'm not worried that my products are going to be overshadowed by somebody else's. Hey, it's a meatball. That was just a side glance of a meatball there. So my products, I'm confident in them, and I know that if I encourage other people to do OSR products, I've had a lot of people say, "Oh, could I write something for the Invisible College, or could I write something that uses line and drag?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course you can. I want that. I think that's great." And there's a lot of other people that are like, "Well, I made this thing." I'm like, "Hey, that's interesting," and I'll share it and I'll talk about it, because we want to encourage that creativity, because that also will in turn make us more creative. We get inspired by some of the stuff they come out with. And that's a totally different atmosphere. So some of these people could see that, and they could understand that there is no gatekeeping going on inside the real OSR. Ironically, the gatekeepers are the people in the fake OSR who have, first of all, a ideological barrier to entry, and then within that have this careful gatekeeping of the people that they considered their tenured class, that have to be given all kinds of fealty oaths, so that they will in turn perhaps eventually give you some attention in return. That's just such a horrible system to live under, and if they saw the difference, if they understood why there is actually another OSR that is more influential and that has much more success and that has a much more inviting atmosphere, where it's just a pure meritocracy, right? I'm not going to promote somebody else's stuff because of them licking my boots, or because they are of a certain demographic group that I approve of, or because of their politics even. I don't care about that, right? I mean, as long as they stand for things like free speech, right? But I'll promote their stuff if their stuff is good, right? If it seems cool and interesting and well designed. And those are the games that succeed in the real OSR. Those are the products that do well. So, if any of you happen to be watching this, maybe you're hate watching this, give that some thought. I mean, there are people that have switched over and realized that, oh wow, actually this is not bad, and these people are good. And if you care more about gaming and designing games and of making interesting and good stuff within the OSR framework than you do about virtue signaling, then you're probably going to have a better time in the real OSR. Give it some thought. Anyways, that's everything for today. Check out all my products. let's keep showing these people that they're wrong. And one way to do that is by purchasing my stuff. A lot of them have like Patreons, and they sometimes brag that my Patreon makes like twice as much as the RPG pundits. Yeah, but I never promote my Patreon makes it's like $30. People, and these are people that either have bought every product I've made, or every product they want to that I've made, or don't actually even play RPGs but like the cut of my jib, and so they support me on Patreon. And you're welcome to do that too. But I'd much rather that you got something out of it by buying one of my products and playing it for yourself. And be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed, and share this video everywhere you think it'll be welcomed and everywhere you think it might piss someone off, or where it might open someone's eyes. Who knows? It's possible. It happened a few times, so it could happen again. That's everything for today. Currently smoking a Peterson poker plus, it's way down in there, Argento Natural.